Thanks, Jonas, that you're here. Please start.
Thank you very much, Lars. So hello, everyone. As Lars said, I'm Jonas. I'm the Senior Project Manager for Policy Kitchen here with Voraus in Switzerland. I thought, so I didn't bring any slides or anything formal. I will just talk pretty informally about what we do. And since we're a fairly small group, I also invite you to interrupt me if anything is unclear or if you have any questions at any point. I hope that's okay, Lars. There's a few things I would touch upon in this brief input. Because we're talking about global democracy, technology assisted. It has a technological component, but in our view, it also has a very strong organizational and human component. So we'll first talk a little bit about Voraus, the Open Think Tank network it's part on, and then go into the Policy Kitchen tool, which is basically what we use to essentially crowdsource policy recommendations from an international crowd most of the time. So Voraus stands for Swiss Forum on Foreign Policy, Forum Außenpolitik. It's a Swiss think tank with a 10-year history already that since the beginning operates on a pretty unique model. So most think tanks in the world have paid researchers that are commissioned to do work on certain areas. In our case, we see ourselves much more as a platform for the general public, especially the young generation, to make their voices heard, especially in the foreign ministry and the parliament, as well as international Geneva here in Switzerland. So basically, we have an office in Zurich and one in Geneva that support the volunteer structure, but at the core is a volunteer structure with both a regional component, so we have groups locally in different cities in Switzerland, and we have a thematic structure that is a little bit more dispersed, that works on content on a volunteer basis, as I've said, on a whole range of issues ranging from migration to environment to EU politics to you name it. So the way we generated policy recommendations so far was usually just people in the community meeting up at an event or in a bar, and they come up with an idea like, oh, the government should do this or that. So they get together and write a publication and use the Voraus brands and our communication networks to make impact with their ideas. So that's the very basic model. Then in recent years, we found that this model seems to be quite successful in Switzerland. So we're a pretty recognized actor in the foreign policy scene here nationally. And we were wondering if the model also works in other countries, because you could say Switzerland is kind of unique. It has this, very accessible, direct democracy. People are used to having a little bit of contact with decision makers. But how does it work in places like Germany or Paris or London with a bit more of a separation maybe between the political elite and the population? So we started co-founding and supporting the establishment of sister think tanks in other neighboring countries, usually through personal contacts. And in the last 2-3 years, we contributed to the foundation of 4 sister think tanks in Paris, Vienna, London, and Berlin. Berlin was the first. And surprisingly, the model seems to work there as well. So Polis 180, our Berlin partner, is fairly recognized now as well. They're super dynamic, their community is growing. And when they invite politicians, they come. So that's usually a sign of success. Now, we together operate under the loose umbrella of the Open Think Tank network, both among each other and with external partners. But we found that even in Switzerland, so this organic model that I just mentioned, how we can contribute policy recommendations to decision makers, it has its limits when we talk about geography. So when two people meet in a room in Bern and discuss something about migration policy, there's no way for people in Lausanne, or even less for people in London or Oxford or wherever else, to contribute to the discussion. So it was pretty clear for us from the beginning that we needed some sort of digital platform to enable this collaboration, joint brainstorming and joint processes to get from ideas to publications and eventually impact. So 3 years ago, or no, that was actually in 2016, I made a first pilot with a commercial software. It was called Cradicity, using an open ideation structure. So the basic idea there is that you have a challenge question, a problem to solve. You invite the general public to contribute ideas. There's the possibility to comment and discuss these ideas, and to prioritize ideas using voting or an external jury, which is also an option. And in this pilot, we were able to mobilize around 300 people on a question of migration policy in Switzerland. The ideas then went into a publication, a book publication, and a lot of impact. And we found, oh, wow, this is cool. We should have something like that for internal use.
Jonas, may I ask you a quick question? Sorry, was this hello, nice to meet you, by the way.
Nice to meet you, Samuel.
Very interesting. Was this a fictitious, hypothetical problem that you asked participants to solve, or was it an actual matter of policy of the day at the time?
So this was happening at the peak of the European migration crisis. So 2015, 16, 17 was the time when I led a migration dialogue project. And we asked an open question. If I think back now, actually we asked 3 questions, if I remember right. And it was something like, I don't remember the exact wording because it's so long ago, but it was like something along the lines of, how can we make better use of the talents migrating to Switzerland, or something like that.
I see. Okay.
So open question, the ideas went in all types of directions.
Yeah.
And that's generally also the model we use with Policy Kitchen nowadays. So, for example, the Inclusiveness in AI challenge that Lars referred to in the introduction, that was already using Policy Kitchen. And where we came from there was the fact that so many international organizations like the OECD, the EU, G7, G20, etc., started publishing principles and guidelines for the use of artificial intelligence. So everybody was scrambling a little bit to create governance structures for this new disruptive technology. And they created these documents, and they had all these nice words like fairness, yada, yada, and inclusiveness was one of them. And our point of departure was, okay, this is cool, but nobody says what inclusiveness even means or how it should be implemented in practice.
Yeah.
So our question was, how should this principle of inclusiveness that seems universally adopted in all those documents, how should this be applied in practice? And this was already the most international campaign that we've done so far. We partnered with both the Open Think Tank Network, so our internal circle, let's say, and Swissnex, an external actor that had a worldwide network of local representations. And so we were able to scale participation pretty much across 4 continents. Wow. With workshops in Bangalore, Sao Paulo, Seoul, San Francisco, and all across Europe.
Awesome.
To brainstorm about this question. We collected all this input, and instead of doing a voting or some type of selection of the ideas, we had an internal team looking at all the material that came together, treating it as data in say, an inductive research process. And identifying clusters of shared meaning and scope that came up in these ideas. So, for instance, people answered this question very differently. Some said, oh, inclusiveness in AI is about algorithmic bias. So machines might be trained on data that contain a bias and then inform biased decisions. So that's not very inclusive. You should have inclusive data that is not, say, racially or sexually or whatever else biased. So that's one dimension that appeared. But also other dimensions were things like access to technology, access to data, or at an even higher level, say transfer mechanisms between poor countries and rich countries, because the rich countries will benefit much more from the technology than the poor countries, and stuff like that. So from this data that came together, we identified different clusters and made a publication out of that, and then went out to decision makers, particularly here in international Geneva, like ITU and Geneva Internet Platform and other actors, to tell them what the people we involved in this process were thinking about inclusiveness in AI. So this is just as an example.
Wow, amazing. Thanks for the long answer. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Very interesting.
Yeah, but
can I just jump in?
Lucy.
Sorry, Jonas. Thank you very much. Really fascinating, actually, because these are some of the problems and issues that we're grappling with too. You don't have to answer that right now, but I'd just like to flag it at this point. There are two things that I'm interested in here. So first, you were saying that it was a team of your own internal team, basically analyzing the data, identifying clusters, and kind of fleshing out, you know, the sort of priority or the kind of salience of different issues that were identified. I'm interested in that, or whether you were using AI to actually sift through the data that was coming in. And the other thing is the identification of issues or the general problem. You know, these, if I understand you correctly, for us also identifies those internally, basically, or kind of in exchange with your partners, with experts, etc. Or what is the process that you use? You know, is that kind of pretty random, things that just kind of get, you know, flushed to the surface, or is there a more systematic process through which you identify issues that you want to address?
Very interesting question. So my suggestion is I just keep on answering your questions because you set the priority of this task, of this talk. So identifying issues, there's a range of sources where the issues can come from. And I look at it a little bit like an onion model. So obviously within 4 Hours, the original idea of Policy Kitchen was basically a tool to support the work of our volunteer structure. So we're a bottom-up grassroots organization. We try not to set issues top-down, but see what are the priorities in the community. And they flag one issue, and then we support them in implementing a process around it. So sometimes the priorities come from within the 4 Hours community. Sometimes they come from the Open Think Tank Network community. For instance, right now we're in the middle of writing a publication from another international process on feminist foreign policy. And that was an idea that just came out from a program group on identities from our London partner, Agora. So they were like, hey, we should be talking about this for a number of reasons, 2020 being a special year for the feminist agenda. And they asked around, is anyone interested? And everyone said yes. And so this became the first joint project in the Open Think Tank Network. But that's still internal. And then we also started developing Policy Kitchen as some sort of a service model. So we found that many many external organizations actually have an interest in this type of participatory method. And so sometimes the topics come from outside. For instance, earlier this year, we helped the Swiss Office for the Environment, so a government institution, to crowdsource ideas on the linkage between digital technologies and environmental protection. So they mandated us, basically, they gave the topic and we just implemented the process. So for us, that's a way to pay salaries and also to grow the crowds. Yeah, but we don't have a systematic process on, say, crowd-generated priorities yet. It's an idea we're toying with, but haven't implemented. So that's to the first, or your second question, and then to the first, are we using AI to sift through the material? No. It's also something I know it does exist out there. There are a number of tools that are AI assisted. In our case, that's not the case. It will become much more relevant as soon as the numbers rise. In the present state, I must say that most of what we do reaches about 200 to 300, or say 100 to 300 participants, depending on how much effort we put into it. Much of it is actually based on workshops, much more than just online, direct interaction in the platform. It's a learning we've made. Like if you just put out a link, the return is not so big, but people like to have exchange with other people and talk and meet interesting people. So that's basically the best thing we have right now, is the option to have decentralized, be it physical or virtual workshops contributing to the challenge. So the challenge is all under the same roof, no matter if you're in Bangalore or in Zurich. And that's maybe also, so I mean, in this whole civic tech debate or this whole world, there's different things you can do. You can collect opinions about things using surveys on social media, and that's fairly easy to scale. So people do that with millions of people at a time. In our case, we're mostly interested in crowdsourcing innovative ideas. So the task for the actual person is much more complicated than saying, yeah, I like this or I don't like this, or which is my preference among those three choices. The task for participants in our processes is to actually come up with something fresh and new and write it down. So because the effort required to really be part of it is relatively high, this also puts a limit on the scale we can hope to achieve. I think this is something that's probably quite relevant for your discussion.
I was going to ask a quick follow-up, actually, if I may. So would you elaborate on that? How you increased or encouraged participation by making the link or the buy-in less passive? Am I getting you right? Like if you're saying you noticed a difference between just putting a link out there versus enabling an exchange.
So I was actually talking about two things. One is scale depends largely on, I mean, first of all, your abilities to scale with communication and so forth, like what's your outreach, but the activation of what's actually coming back will depend on the, say, the ease of the task. So it's much easier to scale simple tasks, like just show me your preference between, steak or fish. That's easy to get to millions of people and actually get data back. If you ask a complicated question that requires maybe some knowledge, some thought, and sitting down and writing, this will limit the size of what's coming back from the community, given a fixed ability of outreach, let's say. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, given that we're working with policy recommendations and the more difficult tasks, let's say, in the democratic process, we found that just inviting people to contribute online doesn't get a lot of return.
Right.
But if we invite people to be it physical or virtual events that are designed for co-creating ideas, the return is much better, because people, not only can they contribute to the policy discussion, but also they have a social component. They can, get inputs from experts. They can meet with peers. So people like to get together.
Apparently, that's fascinating. So there's a real world correspondent event that is like finite, and that encourages people to partake. That's is one insight that's amazing. Cool.
That is definitely one learning that we've had. And so this is also, in the very introduction, I said something, it has a tech component, but it also has an organizational component. My belief is that for the specific type of work that we are doing, we cannot do it only virtually. So Policy Kitchen is sort of the glue for our work. But at the very core is our ability to scale participation internationally with actual people of flesh and blood in the different countries doing stuff.
Yeah.
So this is why the Open Think Tank Network as an organization is so essential for us. We can, organize these get-togethers, these workshops in a whole range of different cities in the world, because they're actual people, boots on the ground, to reach out, create experiences for people participating.
From a participant's perspective, I could also add something to that, because I experienced the physical as well as online meetings to that. And one of the aspects that made it difficult, I think, for Jonas to explain it, because there's a hidden phase model also in these discussions. Some parts are easy to scale up, others are not. Understanding the challenge is something that everyone can read up in front, because it's nicely worded on the website. We'll probably get to that. And so in terms of getting to the mood, it's easy. General presentations, or also YouTube would have worked in one. But just being in that online meeting session and getting the basics already creates a collaboration. And then the interesting part for this idea creation, you actually split us up in small groups. I think about 3 as well in the physical as well as in the online meeting, and that gave an interesting dynamics in creating the ideas. We just came to one topic and then perhaps that's another idea, and then plop. Then suddenly from these small scalable parts that from the local workshop split into small ones, gave a large number of ideas, which then in the later phase could again theoretically offline be voted on by the people that were online. That's also scalable. And I think what is challenging is exactly that part about the consolidation. I saw that in the AI discussions, because over time there were so many ideas that even if I tried to comment on some that I like, there was limited time. And then getting that together into one presentation and actually one book that came out very nicely in there. And this, I think, also something that is challenged from the scalability. Do you want to show an example and then perhaps show the phases to? I think that is one of the key points that helps you structure the discussions then to go. Assuming that we would find a topic and a challenge.
Okay, so this is about looking into the actual tool. I can share my screen. That's this window. So I assume you all see my screen now?
I can see it.
Yeah, okay. So when you type policykitchen.com, this is what you see. We're currently also redesigning the landing pages a little bit, but basically the core concept is challenges. So there's other stuff you can do on Policy Kitchen, but I don't go into detail here, just the challenges. In terms of phases, okay, so we have an ongoing challenge right now in partnership with the European Forum Alpbach, the Open Think Tank Network members, and DEZentrum here in Switzerland. It's mandated by the European Forum Alpbach. So here's another case about, the agenda being set externally, and we just help formulate it or get it into practice. So what you see now is the landing page of a challenge. There's the overarching question in the title, a nice image in the background. You see a little bit of data here, or just some key numbers. And here is a supporting narrative. So about the question, about the process, and some sign-up links to the workshops that I mentioned, and obviously some partnerships and all that. So this is usually the basic for even a user that doesn't attend an event to understand what's asked of him and what the context is. You could use video or images here. It's just, in this case, it's just text. Phases. So this is actually just nuts and bolts, basic standard open ideation mechanisms. They're usually time-bound and objective-oriented. So you have a process that goes from 6th August to 30th August, where we're just creating visions. Then there's very soon, there's this session at the European Forum Alpbach where participants can pitch some of the ideas to European decision makers in a breakout session at the European Forum Alpbach that's taking place virtually today, this year because of COVID. And then there's a refinement phase where the stuff gets improved also with the help of participants for a final report. And then the final report has another impact event. So that comes from the partners, but basically there's going to be a room full of important people listening to the key insights of the report. And maybe at this point I can also mention that sort of offering impact, or at least what we can do to create impact for the ideas of the participants, is essential in engaging people in the first place. So like whatever you do in participatory processes, it's super important to tell participants where the journey is going and why they should care. And in our case, offering a road from their ideas to decision makers is the best thing we can offer. So that's what we're good at.
May I, sorry, can I ask another follow-up? Because that's also very interesting for me. What is where does the impact start? In your opinion, is it already a sign of impact that you managed, as you said, to get people to gather or get together in like united around a purpose somewhere, around the world? Or is the impact, are you specifically talking about like decision makers are responding to your activity? Where do you sort of draw the line of this?
Okay, so I should answer this at the level of our organization for us, because we have a strategy and an impact definition and impact evaluation tools. Cool. And we settled for an impact definition that is, quote, decision makers and multipliers publicly engage with our content, end of quote. So, I mean, it's based on a theory of change that, political decisions are based on discourse. So basically the words and images and mental images in the heads of people with power to make decisions. And this is a competitive space. Everybody tries to influence their minds. And I mean, the final impact you would want to see is actual change in legislation or in policy or in real world stuff being different because of your action than without it. However, this type of impact, in our case, we identify as a think tank and not as an advocacy group or a lobby organization. So as an advocacy group or a lobby organization, your goal is to change laws, basically, or policy, and you also take action to really follow up with politicians and push them and drink coffee and whatnot to really lobby for your cause.
Mm-hmm.
But in our case, we identify as a neutral platform. So Voraus doesn't have a political opinion. We offer processes by which ideas from the bottom up can reach the top.
Mm-hmm.
But we cannot lobby for individual ideas. We can just present them and say like, oh, have you thought about that? And that's the end of our mission. It's probably a bit different for other organizations, but this is how we can keep this political neutrality thing, and it has implications on funding and everything else.
Of course. My question, according to that definition, playing devil's advocate for a second, if a decision maker publicly disparages you for some reason, right? Would that qualify as impact, or am I just splitting hairs here?
It probably would in this case, yes. You can say bad publicity is good publicity. Someone said that before.
I've heard that. Right.
I don't know, but I mean, obviously, for some other things, just getting people in a room, especially people that haven't talked before, is already valuable. So the whole 3 years of my migration dialogue project, that was all it was about. Like creating dialogue between right-wing people and asylum seekers and the middle, and just have them exchange so society doesn't drift apart even further. So that is a legitimate goal, but in case of this type of work, we say what we want to achieve is, give the population or participants an avenue to generate ideas that will then be heard by decision makers, whether or not the policy they propose is implemented or not. That is not really our task.
Got it.
Okay, now I guess that's where it gets interesting, because what you are doing in the first place is motivating people to give you ideas, which is, of course, an important task already. But now you said you want to be neutral. So I think that's the tricky part now. How do you find a consensus between all those inputs? Because you are moderating those points. And in the end, somehow somebody has to generate a final proposal out of all these ideas. So how do you do that? On one side, you have to moderate it and I guess also propose solutions, but on the other side, you should stay neutral. So I think that's now the very interesting question is, how do you really find consensus? And is there in the end something like a voting to make sure that what you propose is really reflecting all the inputs you got in the first place?
Several answers to that. So first of all, just in the publications, we usually have a disclaimer saying, okay, this is the opinion of the authors and not of Voraus. So that's already one thing. Second, in the policy kitchen processes, we leave the ownership of the ideas with the people. So they're not giving us ideas and we publish them under our name. We just use the brand Voraus or Open Think Tank Network for the publication, but we refer to the original ideas, including the names of the original contributors in the publication. So that's one, just a strict rule. Keep the ownership of the ideas with the original contributors. And then to your second question about this, which is more about selection among a range of proposals. We made different experiments. And in the beginning of the project, so roughly 2 years ago, 1.5 years ago, we followed the standard open ideation sort of mechanism that is also used in corporate innovation or whatever, where you have a challenge, a bunch of ideas, a selection mechanism, and then something like the best idea, which in the corporate world usually gets rewarded with prize money or things like that. And we tried that. We had a voting mechanism, so we had a two-step, that was in the biodiversity challenge. We had a two-step process for the selection. So pre-selection by voting, boiling it down to, say, what was it, 15 ideas out of 100 and something. And then a very high-level jury selection that was composed of people from, members of parliament from different parties, and the state secretary and the CEO of WWF and some high-level people looking at those ideas and looking at the pre-selection and then saying, okay, these 5 are the best ideas. So it wasn't us making that choice, first of all. Second, we found that with this mechanism, unfortunately, we didn't take into account that, so the ideas that came were short snippets, just a basic proposal, this should be done. But then to make a publication, you need long form text. And in this model, there was a winner, like, oh, wow, you won. Your idea is the best idea. But then you have to write the long form text. And following up with these people to actually do that was a very tedious process, and it took us a year from the selection of the ideas until the publication came out. So that didn't seem to work so well. There's a few things you could do there. And now we switch more to a model that I call treat ideas as data, which changes a little bit also the shape of the publication. So instead of coming up with the 3 best recommendations from the process, the publications now are more meta-level reports about the participatory process. So again, all the material that comes in is clustered by a team or so, and they make, the chapters are then, okay, so this is a dimension that came up, this is a dimension that came up, this is a dimension that came up in the answers to the question. And within each dimension or chapter, there is a little meta-narrative, what this is all about, and then pointers to a number of ideas that came up in the process. There is still a little bit of selection going on, and that's then in the hands of the internal teams writing these chapters. But there's much more visibility given to much higher number of ideas than in the previous model. I hope that was clear enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's already a nice answer, of course. And you said you have 200 to 300 participants. I guess that is per topic, right? So yeah, for one topic. So how many participants could you even handle? So I guess if you go towards the thousands, then you would not be able to handle that, or then you would need something like AI or automatic mechanisms. Is that the right assumption?
That is the correct assumption.
And do you already think towards doing a solution, and scalable solution, or is that still too far away?
Well, it depends a little bit on budgets. So we're in conversation with a number of providers of AI that could be put behind the backend, including IBM. They've done some pretty amazing work on figuring out different arguments in a large body of text. Right now, we would have to scale labor with the community. That's correct. Yeah. And I mean, there's tools that are made for scale. So if you think about maybe Polis, that's been pretty. So this is a tool they used for crowdsourcing policy by the Taiwanese government, and is now being used by other actors. So there is another mechanism where basically people self-identify as a certain demographic in the first place, and then you always make a choice between two, like which is your preference among different options, and you can write a third one, and there's a whole algorithm around which options are presented to people, and then you get something like an opinions map. So that's also an interesting and scalable approach, but it's a little less interesting in terms of crowdsourcing recommendations at the level that we do in sort of think tank publications. But yeah, we want AI in the end. We want scale, and we're actively looking for partners here.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
My name is Rasmus ten Bergen. I'm responsible for Democracy Without Borders, global voting platform, the World Parliament Experiment, together with Michael Weidinger, who is also in the call. And thank you for your very interesting talk. It was, for me, it was interesting for two reasons. Because the first reason is because many things you are doing are so similar with what we are doing on our global voting platform in Democracy Without Borders. And the other reason is that some things are different. So I think we can learn a lot from the things you are doing similar. And I'm interested in finding out what is different and how can that be used. And one main question is compared to something trying to really establish a democratic process, a virtual world parliament on the internet. It's what we are trying to do, but not exactly what you are doing. But I'm interested in the difference. So is there any chance for the community to influence the policy of your organization? Does it make a difference whether there are 10 or 1,000 participants engaged in a discussion? So how do you decide as an organization where to put your resources? Is this part of the process or is this an external thing?
Okay, I'm not 100% sure if I understood the core question. Influencing the organization itself, sort of like the internal politics of the organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For example, what if if the community says 80% of your processes are great, but I don't like 20%. I have a proposal how to change the software, for example.
Okay.
Is there a possibility in your project to do that?
Yeah, so we have a feedback module implemented on the website that should appear on most places. So there's this thing down here, but there's also qualitative feedback that you can give at any time. And we also do user research, like periodically we reach out to people asking them what their priorities are and what they would improve. And we align the design of the platform or where we invest in terms of development very much with the priorities of the feedback that we get, pretty much like most software companies would do, I think. We're not getting terribly much feedback just based on the organic tools, but we collect feedback also on the workshops, and there's always a little bug report or ideas coming up. Yeah, if that answers the question.
Yeah, part of it.
And the other part was?
The other part was, what if there's some kind of collaborative process? So what if there are different opinions? If people think, okay, you focused very much on this initiative, but my biodiversity initiative was more important. Can you influence that somehow?
So,
is there, in other words, is there a democratic internal mechanism in this initiative?
Maybe I may add a question.
Michael, help me.
Michael, Rasmus already mentioned my name. I'd like to know more about the moderation you do, how you do it, and how you select issues, and maybe even contributions, or maybe kick out a Nazi contribution or something like that.
Okay, just quickly to answer Rasmus' second question. So, I mean, we're a member-based organization in the first place, For House, not Policy Kitchen. Policy Kitchen is a project below For House at the moment. And so members have the opportunity to vote the board and elect the board and things like that. We self-identify, or we see our role in making the lives of the members more wonderful. So we're very responsive to feedback. We don't get that much of say, critical feedback and adjusting priorities. But there are certain moments in the year where the membership is very much invited to do that. And so now I can switch to Michael's question. So the platform is completely public. So anyone can just make an account and start contributing to this discussion. And we were, in the beginning, very much afraid that we will have to fight with trolls a lot. We also see a fairly large number of fake accounts being created on the platform, mostly from Russia and the Ukraine. But so far they're not doing anything, and we just delete them. So it's fairly easy to see which new users are legit and which aren't. So there we just have a policy of deleting whatever we think is fishy. However, in terms of actual content being posted, so far we haven't had much issues. Like we had one case of some Viagra spam, and we saw it and deleted it. Every challenge does have a moderator, so that's actually part of, so if I go back, I'm still sharing my screen, I realize, sorry. So you have the unit of moderators within each challenge, and we have a moderator briefing, and we have a community guideline. So basically policy on how to behave in Policy Kitchen. And the moderators do have the right, I stop share for the moment so you can see me. And the moderators do have the right to say basically warn abusive users and then delete their comments or kick it out. Surprisingly, we didn't have a lot of this issue, but it might come up depending on the topic area that we're treating, and also the you know, maybe the scale of the outreach.
Do you have professional or paid moderators, or are they doing it on a unpaid basis?
They're doing it on unpaid basis, like most of the work in our organization.
And could you perhaps give me some idea of the amount of work that's behind the moderation for one issue? Because I think you have to be actually quite attentive in order to prevent something going wrong and things, you know, going in a wrong direction.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So, I mean, we struggle, to be fairly honest, we struggle a little bit with levels of engagement after the workshops. So as I said, like most of the content is actually generated during workshops, not just randomly online. Some is, most is not. And so the workshops create a peak of activity, but then obviously we would like people to come back and improve their ideas. They can edit it in Teams, there's comment functions and so forth. This is not being used as much as we would like to see. Again, because people like the fact of getting together, but most people are busy with their lives and maybe, you know, they just don't want to go online again to talk about things. And we would like to have more moderators time than we usually have with the volunteer resources that we have, not just to police the community, but also to create more engagement. And so there's a bunch of things that we're doing also on the technical level, like, okay, now there's smartphone app coming up, there's, you know, notifications and certain, you know, nudges and things that we can do to boost activity. But obviously an actual person interacting with you is the best incentive to come back. And so far moderators, I would say, like, for a challenge with 180 participants, 4 moderators will each spend about half an hour to an hour per week.
Perhaps from the participants.
Thank you very much.
Because I was in 2 of these challenges. The AI challenge had some, because it had multiple physical meetings. Mm-hmm. The next physical meeting then commented again on the previous ideas and the meetings. And so when you participated in one and followed one idea or co-authored one idea, you would get in your mailbox also reminders that someone commented on it or your co-author change the idea. Perhaps, Jonas, we could perhaps show one example idea that it would be a bit more
tangible.
And the other one, about the sustainable digital world, that only had one workshop. And there I really felt, okay, after the workshop, it drifted down. There was one person that, again, read something, commented on some of my comments, but that didn't have that continuous one. So it's definitely community participation as well. And perhaps one remark to Rasmus' question about biodiversity. My biodiversity challenge is more interesting than your digital democracy challenge. Actually, when you look at the webpage and I found interesting ideas, I just follow the challenge. And then there's that stream mechanism that a bit keeps you up to date, a bit like a Twitter feed or a Facebook story that keeps you up to date about all the challenges that are going on. Yes, that stream perspective, that's also, if it's not your idea, you can still see something, what's happening there, and that Jonas, for example, prepared an idea in preparation of this workshop about 20 minutes ago. No, 15.
One in between, what strikes me is you say, if I get it right, there's no way of doing it on a pure online basis without meeting in person. Actually, as far as I understand, these meetings in person are very important for the whole process. They are the peaks of participation, of comments, of activity, and without them, you wouldn't see this thing working. Is that right?
In our particular model, yes. I would say the meet. I mean, they can be virtual meetings, but they are essential. And I think if you want to do something purely online, either you need to simplify the task for participants and maybe go more into the direction of survey or something, simple and digestible. Or you would have to go into the direction of social media scraping, whatever, like to figure out, using AI on text that's already generated to figure out, okay, what are people thinking? What do they want? So both of this is being done. And we're just a pretty special case. I mean, maybe I can make a comment about the general idea of democracy, because there's different aspects of a democracy. So Rasmus, you talked about world parliament and voting, which indicates something about decision-making mechanisms. We are in no position to offer our participants that any decision is made based on their input, because we're a think tank where we try to influence policy, but we're not the policymakers themselves, or some robot parliament. So I don't know. There's different stages in the policy cycle. There's like agenda setting. There's the deliberation stage.
Yeah.
There's
sorry to interrupt. I understood that part, and that makes it interesting because I was thinking about ways how to interact. How can we use what you are doing to create a connection with what is going on in this virtual parliament on the global voting platform. So I did not want to persuade you to change that. I just wanted to identify where's the difference and where's the similarity to find the best way to use that. Perfect.
Okay, and I think Lars, you wanted to have a bit more like concrete, how does this work? So
I think we have to show the tool very briefly, the different steps. I think you showed how to get to a challenge and how the first ideas get into a challenge.
So now we're in the challenge. I showed you the about page. There's a stream that just updates any activity in the challenge. And there's an idea overview. So this is basically where all the participant-generated content comes up. and at the core is basically this create idea button. You can create an idea. I already prepared a mock idea for illustration purposes. I think one thing I would like to highlight here is that one key difference between our tool and other, because there's so many open ideation tools out there, we try to be on the collaborative rather than the competitive spectrum. And so we included a collaborative texts module that allows the simultaneous editing of ideas. This is particularly valuable in a workshop setting, but it can also be used for collaborative drafting of entire documents, or for things like consultations on existing documents. And so this is basically the web form that you see when you create an idea. The main things are the title, the summary, and then this description is the main body. So Lars and me can now simultaneously edit the idea. I don't know, Lars, are you in it? I think it would really make a positive impact.
I tried to write something in the summary, and that's text limited, so I'll add some.
Yeah, so the collaborative text is only in the exactly the description part. Yeah, okay. So another interesting feature that I think is kind of unique is the possibility to add co-authors. So I could tag my colleague Eduardo Belenchon to the idea as well, and save the thing, and then it can so the visibility of the original contributors that I mentioned in the beginning, or the ownership, that's kind of important. So they will be visible here. These are the people that we will also reference in the publication, including the link to the idea. We didn't choose a picture now, but that's also something you could do. And then there's this comment field here that you can use for deliberation. It's fairly simple, but yeah, this is a comment. There is the possibility to follow or unfollow ideas. So this is how you can keep in touch with people that have interesting ideas. And there's also the possibility to upvote ideas. If voting is part of the process design, because in the challenge, maybe I can also show you the back end of a challenge. So I can edit this challenge. I won't save it because it's live now, but basically here we give all the basic about description. And we have different phases, and each phase comes with a start and end date, a description, and either the possibility to design an automatic idea advancement mechanism. So this can be best ideas, so best 10% in the number of votes, or best 10 places in the number of votes, or number of contributors, whatever you want. And each phase also comes with specific permissions. So during the time that the phase is active, you can edit, view, create ideas, comment, and vote. And for instance, if voting is an important part of your process, you would have vote active during the phase where voting is active, and automatically advance X number of best ideas based on votes. And then in the phase following, you would deactivate the permission on voting because voting is over. As simple as that. Yeah, that was a very quick intro to the tool. But again, so my opinion is the technology itself is not rocket science. It's much more about the process. It's much more about the engagement. How do you get out, create interest in what you do? And then what happens after people have done their stuff on the platform? So what is the form of the output? What is the product? What is the objective of something like that? Is it a policy paper like it is in our case, or is it a pitch event at, I don't know, the UN? Or yeah, where is the journey going? And how do you create impact with the results of the challenge? And then obviously there's a few things you can do with tech, especially if you move into the direction of AI and so forth. But tech alone won't solve the problems of the world. This is my personal opinion.
I think that's a very good summary. Also, there could be actually the call for action. As you said, the Policy Kitchen platform is open to register for everyone. Everyone can contribute to the discussion, contribute their expertise. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting, especially the one that you now have for Altbach. I already registered and follow up. I'll do that. I would also slowly turn towards wrapping the meeting up. Are there any questions still from the audience?
Yes, but in the best way. Just a lot of like interesting points to keep the discussion going. Really, really fascinating conversation. Thank you, Jonas.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, I can agree. I think it's an absolute fascinating input based on a lot of experience that you've been collecting. Really valuable. And like Rasmus and Michael were saying, I think there are a lot of synergies that can be created there, and also built on the systems that you're already kind of experimenting with, and kind of pushing the boundaries as well. So really exciting. Thank you very much, Jonas, for your time.
Thank you. Happy to stay in touch too. Lars, you can share my email with everyone if you want to follow up with anything. Happy to be here.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. And as one teaser from the GloCo perspective, I wanted to show you our concept of that policy process, and that we today worked on, I would say, steps 4 and 5 of our model, especially because the Policy Kitchen, I think, helps a lot with finding these solutions after you already defined the topics. All this mechanism can be tied in, and I think the digital tools are the opportunity to really work towards global democracy, such that everyone who has access can provide and get a voice and a vote. We have to get across the digital divide aspects. We have to work with the national sovereignty aspects. But overall, there is the opportunity to go global, and I hope that we'll find the opportunities and the collaboration. And for that one, we'll continue with that webinar series. And you will get information about that through our newsletter, where you can register at www.gloco.ch or following our Twitter channel.